Hello and welcome to the Digital Deviants Tour St. Louis. I am so excited to be here with one of my favorite personalities in all of Instagram, Jordan Moblo. And before we get into official introductions and get to pass the baton to our independent bookstore host, I do want to acknowledge the pain that our nation is feeling amidst the loss of Black lives at the hands of our nation's law enforcement. So to the Black folks who may be watching, your lives matter. To my predominantly white fans, we must do better. I have posted a link in our Crowdcast description for those hoping to make a difference, for our friends who identify as QTPOC. In the meantime, please join me in a moment of silence to honor the lives of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Thank you. And now I'm pleased to introduce our host for the evening, Shane Mullen, who will give us a little bit of knowledge about why independent bookshops are so important and how you can support them, and also my book.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for bringing us into this, for hosting this, and we are very happy to be a part of this. So I would like to welcome everyone for this portion of the tour. Left Bank Books presents online, Eric Cervini in conversation with Jordan Moblo. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years this year. We are queer-owned and a lot queer-operated. We would like to thank our supporters, the supporters of Eric Cervini and Jordan Moblo, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation but are still bringing you the things that you love most about Left Bank Books with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the world. We are happy to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts and hopefully make the world a better place. We hope you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Eric and Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you and for all of your friends, for your reading group, for everyone at left-bank.com, or you can click the purchase button right down there. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to be able to keep our bookstore and staff here in St. Louis through the most unusual of times, and I thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I am the events coordinator for Left Bank Books, and I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. And we will be taking questions that I will help moderate, so be sure to type those. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. From a young Harvard and Cambridge-trained historian, the secret history of the fight for gay rights that began a generation before Stonewall. In 1957, at the height of the space race, a government astronomer named Frank Kameny received a summons to report immediately to Washington, D.C. The Pentagon had reason to believe he was a homosexual. And for the first time, a homosexual fought back. Based on firsthand accounts, recently declassified FBI records, and 40,000 personal documents, the Deviants War unfolds over the course of the 1960s as Kameny built a movement against the government's gay purges. It traces the forgotten ties that bound gay rights to the Black freedom movement, the New Left, lesbian activism, and trans resistance. Above all, it is a story of America in Washington at a cultural and sexual crossroads, of shocking Byzantine public battles with Congress, of FBI informants, murder, betrayal, sex, love, and ultimate victory. Required reading for queer people and straight allies, says Gerard Conley, the author of Boy Erased, and Jim Obergefell, the gay rights activist and plaintiff in Obergefell versus Hodges, says, a detailed and engrossing look at Frank Kamini and his decades-long fight to convince the government and society that, in his words, gay is good. Dr. Eric Cervini is an award-winning historian of LGBTQ plus politics and culture. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, where he was a Gates Scholar. And Jordan Moblo is a TV executive who has made a career of reading books in order to turn them into TV shows. He also runs a very popular Bookstagram account at jordies.book.club, dedicated to celebrating the books he loves, and we are big fans at the bookstore, so several of us follow you. And now I am incredibly pleased and happy to be able to welcome, so if everyone at home would just give a large round of applause for Dr. Eric Cervini and Jordan Moblo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. And as everyone knows, I think this pandemic has shown the importance not just of independent bookstores as sellers of books, but as communities and as spaces where people can have conversations like the one we're having today. So thank you so much for hosting us. And so, Shane, I'm going to minimize you. I'm sorry, but we are going to bring you back. We're going to bring you back in about 30 minutes or so, because everyone who may be watching on Crowdcast, there's a button that says ask a question. Please feel free to ask your questions of either one of us at any point during the next 30 minutes, or if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to also comment there and we'll make sure to answer those as well. Jordan, we are both in Los Angeles, but
you get helicopters.
I do. Yeah. And so thank you so much for joining. And I will say I was not familiar with the world of Bookstagram until really meeting you. And our mutual friend and my literary agent, Dan, who introduced us. So thank you for teaching me your ways on social media, but also for joining tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I love like that intro where it's like, Eric is a doctor and this and this and this, and Jordan is on Instagram. Like,
yes, but you're like gainfully employed. And I'm sitting here like hawking books, so the grass is always greener. But I'm also so excited that we're doing this conversation because there's been a lot of, I think, soul searching within every industry, but especially the literary industry and Hollywood this past week about what this national reckoning in race relations means. And I wanted to take this opportunity to not just be supporting independent bookshops and selling a book, which I think is important, but also be having some difficult conversations about how you and I hope it's okay that I out you, but as gay men, can, especially white cis gay men, can do better.
Yeah.
And we were just talking right before this event with Blair Amani, who's a queer Muslim woman, Black woman, who made it very clear that there's a lot of white people, especially within the LGBTQ plus community, who are asking people of color, like, what do they do? Please teach us, right? And that gets exhausting, as you can imagine. And so I think it's equally important, if not more important, that people like us start having conversations. And what I wanted to thank you starting out with is what you have been doing on social media, of using your platform and your privilege to educate people about some of your own reading, because your Instagram is about books and you have made it your mission this past week to read up on some literature so that we can do the hard work. So I wanted to start there And first, but before we get to what you've been reading and some of the kind of research you've been doing, how in the world did you start Jordy's book club? What's the origin story?
I mean, look, I don't know how many people know about Book Instagram. I had no idea it existed until a couple of years ago when I honestly was just looking for a place to keep track of book reviews, and somehow or another I stumbled upon it and saw these beautiful pictures of books, accompanying reviews, and found out it was this giant community. And so I kind of, my name's actually Jordan, but it's Jordy on Instagram because I was kind of almost embarrassed to have a book account, like what a nerd move to do. And it kind of just built from there and became something I'm really proud of. And I'm really proud of the book community, especially, you know, in times like this. It's funny, I have a personal account also, and I go on my personal account, and to be transparent, I have a lot of gay friends, and most of them are very similar to me. We're white, we live, you know, in West Hollywood. We're very much in this bubble, and most of the stuff that people in my friend group are posting are the same stories, the same memes. They're all doing the black square. You know, it's not very meaningful, and I don't think a lot of people understood what was going on behind that. And then to come over into the book Instagram community, where it's so many people from different walks of life, different genders, different classes, different, you know, sexuality, different races, all these things, the information overload is incredible. And so I'm very grateful for the community in that sense. And I also think that, you know, for me, I am very sensitive. I am an introvert, and normally it would be my first steps to just kind of, you know, I'm supporting quietly, I'm donating, I'm, you know, doing my work behind the scenes. But with a platform of 50,000 people, you really can't do that. And there's this expectation that you speak out. So it was one of those things where it was like, this is important, and I can sit here and do nothing and keep posting pretty pictures of books, or I can take a step off the ledge and really lean into being uncomfortable and do something that is better for the book community and for the Black community as well.
Mm-hmm. And so what I love that you've been doing is you've been kind of tracking your own education, your own kind of self. Oh, by the way, we're both drinking wine. It's been a long day.
What could go wrong?
Long week. It's been a long year. I think it's important to take moments to treat ourselves with a glass of wine every now and then. I don't know about you. I was up at 6 a.m. this morning for an interview, which I have not done since like my rowing days. So I'm still getting used to it. This might hit me a little harder, so I apologize in advance to our listeners. But anyway, what I was so admiring this week, and also I don't know if I ever told you, but I think when I first learned your name and learned about your account, it was right around when American Dirt was coming out. And for people who don't know about that book, there was a lot of controversy about who gets to tell stories of other minority groups if you're not within that minority group. And what I so admired about what you were doing was you were engaging in the conversation and really showing perspectives that you might otherwise not expect from, you know, a social media account that's dedicated to, like you said, pretty books. So what do you think it is about, you know, you mentioned platform. Why do you feel like you need to say something for people who may be watching, who may just have, you know, a few hundred followers or friends or something like that, or even less? Why is it important that we still speak up?
Well, I think that speaking up on your social media account is the least you can be doing when, especially in the current situation, Black people are being murdered in the streets. Like, the least you can do is actually educate yourself and learn a little bit. And look, as gay men, and I'm sure there's a lot of gay men watching right now, I think that our oppression and our growing up, and for me growing up in Michigan, I was bullied. I was considered an other. I didn't consider that we didn't have equal rights. And I think because of that, I automatically assumed that I was an ally with Black people and people of color, because if they were oppressed, then I was oppressed, then we were going through the same thing. And that is just not the case, because as I've learned in 5 days of re-educating myself on racism and anti-racism, because I am white, I have been born into these systems of privilege. And because of that, I am not able to just because I've been oppressed does not mean that I am an equal footing with the Black community. And I think a lot of gay men have used that as an excuse not to do the hard work. And that's something that I think we really need to take a minute to step back and reconsider.
Absolutely. And I think you see it even before this, you see evidence of that, whether it's on social media, on dating apps, on Grindr, not just racism, but misogyny also. You know, when you say like mask for mask, you need to take a step back and say, who are you hurting by saying something like that? And I think it's that basic fact of empathy that we need to be remembering, because we understand what it feels like to be oppressed. And so that doesn't mean we automatically understand the lived experiences of everyone else, but it should allow us to be more empathetic to other people's feelings, because we've also been persecuted, and it means we should be the ones listening and amplifying other people's voices, because we know what it feels like to not be heard, right?
Yeah. And I think like the American Dirt thing, which was a big complaint of the book community and the community at large, was the fact that it was someone else telling an immigrant story in a way that was not authentic to that. And when I brought it up at the time, it was in relation to gay literature like A Little Life or The Great Believers, two books that are very popular with the book community that were not written by gay men, but were written by women. So for me, it was, well, what's the difference between that? And fortunate enough for me, I stuck my foot in my mouth and posted it online and learned a lot from that, which was, you know, if you're going to tell other people's stories, you better be damn right at what you're saying. Otherwise, expect there to be blowback. And I think that goes for, you know, any white people who are telling the stories of a different group culturally or minority or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel, as a writer myself, I feel so ambivalent about that conversation about who should be telling our stories also. Because on one hand, we want allies, and I'm sure this sentiment is shared within in the Black community. Of course, all humans want allies, but also when you suddenly look at what your allies are saying or doing, just like the gay community sees, you know, T-Mobile is like an ally running our march, then suddenly you're like, wait a second, is this really about promoting my rights, or is this about something else? And I think putting ourselves in other people's shoes is so important. But so you, as you mentioned, and what I love about how vulnerable you've been on social media of saying, like, these are things I didn't know, and these are books I have not read that I'm now just starting. Yeah, but I think that's so important, because I think so many people are scared to speak up, because I certainly have felt it in my past. I was worried about saying something wrong, and I think what both you and I have learned the hard way, but the important way, is that it's okay to mess up as long as you acknowledge it, respect the person who calls you out or calls you in, thank them, correct yourself, and move on. And it's okay to admit that you're new to this process. So I'm curious, tell me, because you're the one who's been, you know, making this shift to reading some of these anti-racist books. Can you tell me which one are you reading now, and what have you learned?
I mean, I think it's a long process, and I think it's something where you have to re-educate and reformat what you've been thinking. So right now I'm reading White Fragility, which is written by a white woman, but it's actually really a great beginning first step into learning about what racism is and what white fragility is. And the thing that stuck with me the most, that's very relatable, is I think for so long people think of racism as a behavior and as a good, bad kind of thing. And if you are racist or you engage in racist behavior, it is a bad thing, when in actuality, we are born into these systems of racism without having any say whatsoever. So because of that, because we think it's a good, bad thing, most of the time when we think that we are being racist or saying racist things and we're called on it, instead of actually taking the time to understand why someone might be saying that, our first instinct is to get defensive. because we want to defend our character because we think we've been called out for doing something bad, when in actuality, we should just be listening to what people who have been affected are saying and try and learn and move on from that. And I think that is one of the big takeaways for me, especially as a gay man.
And so talk to me, one thing that I love that you've been doing on your Instagram page is actually highlighting, because I'm like the queen of highlighting, of like taking huge chunks of text and like keeping them in a document for anyone who wants to know how the sausage is made for this book, The Deviant's War, and how it was written. History available now from Left Bank Books. One of the difficult things about history and telling other people's stories is you have to figure out yourself what words are important and what are the key takeaways from thousands and thousands of documents. So, I digitized more than 100,000 documents for this book. And, the hardest part of writing a history book is going through the primary sources and determining in this huge haystack of material what is actually important. And I think it's just as people right now are trying to figure out, as social media is bombarding them with content and material and education, sifting through it. So can you talk to me a little bit more about what are some of the other lessons you've learned so far?
Look, there are a lot of lessons because I've highlighted a lot, and there's a lot to be taken away. And for this book, for me, I've highlighted a lot of the things that relate to the biggest arguments you see online, like about the looting and the rioting and peaceful protesting and what racism means, and should we ask Black people to educate us and things like that, just as a way to be able to explain it to white people in the community. Because at the end of the day, the goal for people like us who are white should be to take the burden off of Black people and have to educate our own communities. The resources are available. They're in books, they're websites. You can literally Google any of these questions, and there are so many resources. I've definitely gotten a lot of questions this week where people are like, I'm overwhelmed. Like, there's too much information out there. Where do I start? And for me, when I respond to that, I'm like, look, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm just doing one thing a day. I'm reading a chapter. I am having a conversation. I am watching a documentary. I am donating. I am following more Black bookstagrammers. I am putting together lists of books by Black authors or books about racism and anti-racism. There is a step you can do every day that furthers the conversation. And I think one of the most important things, and I posted about it today because I think a lot of people on book Instagram are nervous about reviewing books by Black authors or people of color out of fear of stepping in it and getting into that confrontation and having to explain themselves. And I think until white people are comfortable having those conversations and comfortable being uncomfortable, I think that nothing is going to change. I think people need to, I still get it. You get this pit in your stomach where you're like, I need to defend myself, or I am uncomfortable, and it's easier for me to log off and walk away. And that's not the right response. The right response is to lean into those feelings of discomfort, figure out why you're feeling that way, check your own privilege, and talk to either people in the white community or friends who are able to explain it to you. That seems to be the lesson.
Yeah, and I think one of the passages I remember seeing that you actually posted was that there's a tendency among white people, and we all feel it, we all do, where someone calls you out for doing something offensive or racist or just wrong, and you feel the need to defend yourself personally, on a personal level, saying, I am not racist, I am not sexist, I am not this thing, instead of, like you said, leaning into it and examining what's actually happening, thanking that person for helping you, right? Even if it comes across as antagonistic, at the end of the day, if they didn't care about you, they wouldn't have said anything, right? And so I'll give...
For me, it's like, it's been very much amplified because I do have a big platform with, so many thousands of followers. And I think a lot of white people are listening to what I have to say and how I'm responding. And so I'm getting all of these messages from people in the community who are telling me, you're doing that, you're not capitalizing the B in Black. You're doing these things that, you should correct because you are amplifying these messages to such a large community. So it's been a very interesting week of really leaning into things that make me uncomfortable, especially if you're someone like me who's an introvert.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had been already kind of thinking about what it means to be celebrating Pride without parades in the middle of a pandemic. And, I've made it my personal mission because as a historian, one thing, it's in the book that you just cannot escape from is two things that I have been getting on my soapbox as much as I possibly can this week, which is first that Pride in its entirety was borrowed from the Black Freedom Movement, and that we have gay rights because of trans women of color. And I, posted like a 40-minute video explaining all the kind of historical evidence that backs up those two claims. I encourage people to watch it. But as I was doing that, I'll give an example of something where I was actually corrected. And I'm really glad that I was, because you have to be careful, especially about language, right? Because language is so powerful. Anyone who's ever been called a fag or been called gay in a derogatory sense knows the power of language. And one thing that we have to be careful of as, white cis gay men, if we're saying that we have our rights because of the Black Freedom Movement or because of trans women of color, if we say that we owe them, then that implies that they don't have an inherent value to their own life. That Black trans lives matter can't just stand on its own, right? So you have to be careful, right? That terminology of saying I owe them actually can be self-defeating, right? So instead, if we say actually that's a baseline of saying Black trans lives matter, period, and on top of that, we have gay rights because of trans women of color. So we need to go the extra mile, right? We need to not mess up again because we messed up in the past. And someone called me out on that. Someone said, that you're kind of, some of the things you're implying are problematic. And I was like, you know what? I had never thought of that. Thank you.
And you're an expert.
But also I'm not, right? Like, yes, I study my movement, but I study a movement that was predominantly white, right? And I'm very good at saying, what my people and my ancestors within our movement did wrong. But I'm not as well versed in saying what the Black Freedom Movement was doing at the time. And on a normative level, what does that mean about our current obligation? I'm a historian, right? And so I've made the choice to use history to guide my activism. But that process, there in the academy especially, it's a bit taboo to be having that public, outward-facing activist lifestyle, that for quite a while has been taboo. And now you're starting to see people mixing the two spheres a bit more. But I'm the first to admit that I'm still working on it. You are as well. We all are. And I think that vulnerability is so, so important.
Yeah, I think it's like, look, there's so many people who are gonna be like, I'm overwhelmed and I'm just gonna go back to business as usual. And it's not business as usual anymore. It is continuing education and every day doing something else to help out all of our communities that are underrepresented in society right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's like one action item I think we can give everyone, which is, try speaking out and keep speaking out until you make a mistake. And when someone calls you out on it, which might happen or it might not, say thank you. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
Just try it. It's so empowering because I guarantee you that person who you say thank you to and who you respect, you will gain their respect as well. And you might even have a new friend, right? Like you'll be shocked.
Or how about I didn't know that? Or or I've gotten a lot of people asking questions. You say, I don't know. Let me go research that. Let me go look it up. Let me go do my due diligence. So you're not just speaking out of what you don't know or what you think you are and putting yourself in a defensive position.
Yeah, I'm Italian, so I get very defensive. I'm very emotional. I always, especially after a glass of wine, I always need to defend my dignity. But there's just something so important, especially within our community, about vulnerability and about making sure that we're not falling into that trap, especially that masculine trap of having to constantly defend our honor and integrity, and admitting that we're just getting started. I think is so important. So I wanted to ask you, we started with a great book that you're working on right now. It's also Pride Month. So as people are trying to figure out what to read, because you've probably read, you have to read literally for your job. So what other books should people, especially cis gay white men like me, like us, what should we be reading this month?
I really liked a few that come out this year. I think Brandon Taylor's Real Life is really good, about a black man who's getting his like a medical degree in the Midwest, and kind of his toxic relationships and him dealing with his own homosexuality and his history with his family and how, they reacted to his homosexuality. And it is a really complicated book. It's a really difficult book. It is not an easy read, but again, I think that it's one of those books that gets me outside of my white gay bubble that I'm so used to being inside of, and seeing how different cultures and how the black community deals with homosexuality. And I thought it was one of the more eye-opening books that I've read this year so far. So I think that's a big recommendation.
I just took a sneak peek at the Ask a Question. I saw a question about what does it mean when I say the Academy? Very good question. That's such an in-group term. So I'm sorry for people for using lingo.
Oscars?
I have a fun fact about that. When I say the Academy, I just mean academia. So universities, professors and scholars and researchers. That's all I really mean, is inside. When you hear the ivory tower, same thing as the Academy. That's all I mean. Funny fact about the Academy, the longest continuous drag competition in Washington, D.C. is called the Academy Awards. And they were actually founded the same year as the Mattachine Society of Washington, which is the main subject of this book. And absolutely, ball culture especially, but also drag, I think, is something that's so important in history that is just, I wish I could write an entire book. Maybe my next book will be about drag, but
Yes,
I don't know if anyone watches Drag Race. This is Sasha Velour. You're watching this season, aren't you?
Yeah, I watched.
Mm-hmm. Did you watch the finale?
Yeah, I thought it was the perfect winner.
Jada. Oh yeah, Jada. Actually, she. I sent her a book, and I wanted to have her in conversation. And
but me instead.
No, I got you because you're a wonderful person and friend and conversationalist. But it was before the finale, and it was before they filmed it. Wow. So then, of course, she won, and everyone and their mom, wants her on their own Zoom event. So it was wonderful.
You could have asked for Crystal Method in her pinata costume. I would have taken that.
Anyone who doesn't watch Drag Race, just get started. We had, there's 12 seasons to watch. I believe tomorrow is All Stars, which I'm so excited about. We had anyone who hasn't seen it yet, we interviewed on Monday Angina, who is a queen from season 1. Literally the OG, absolutely amazing. She's also based in LA. And she's coming back after 11 years for All Stars finally. So I'm so excited about that. Okay, I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So please, if you have any questions about the book or about Jordan or what other books you recommend, Jordan, I know you have more recommendations for us.
Yes. Well, you and I both loved Under the Rainbow, the Celia
Mhm.
Lasky book that we did this year,
Mhm.
which is really great about what is essentially the most homophobic town in the United States. And they send out an entire group of advocates to go into the town and try and infiltrate it and try and spread awareness. And it's all told kind of in interconnected short stories. And it sounds a little quirky, but I found it to be super grounded and really well written and really emotional. And it's not as slow. It's a pretty fast read. So if you're looking for something quick, it's probably up there as one of my favorites of the year too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so fun. I had her on Quarantini, my podcast and TV and book club for the quarantine era, and she's absolutely phenomenal. People, I haven't officially announced a book for this month, but the de facto book, as you may guess, is this one.
I got my copy.
But I will say I will make a plug for a few other books. Blair Imani, who we just had on right before this, is also another popular historian. She's been a Black Lives Matter activist for years. She was arrested back in 2016 and made the news nationally for that. She has her own book about the Great Migration, and it's called Making Our Way Home, The Great Migration and the Black American Dream. And then two other books that came out the same day as mine. If anyone's watching who may have kids, nieces or nephews, children of other friends or adults who want a quick and easy guide to being a good queer citizen of the world, or understanding what the gender binary is. I know there's so much talk now about gender, which is a new conversation that should have been happening earlier. Two authors who were also on our tour were Adam Eli, who wrote The New Queer Conscience, talking about our obligation to queers all over the world. And then the incredible performance artist, Alok, who wrote Beyond the Gender Binary. So both of those, they're super cheap because they're small. They're called pocket change series. You literally can fit them in your pocket. So highly recommend those for understanding how we can be better citizens in the umbrella of LGBTQ+, or the umbrella of deviant, which is one of the words I use. But also Celia was such a pleasure to talk to. And also a Los Angelino, so we'll all have to get dinner or something. Yeah, after all this is over, and we can be in the same place. It looks like we have a few questions. Ooh, good. Okay, we're getting questions about books. So I am going to bring back Shane. Let me see. Shane, are you with us?
I hope so.
Hey!
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So I wanted to make my own recommendation. Saya Jones, How We Fight for Our Lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my favorite books from last year, and I've gotten to meet him. Or I should check my pronouns. Them. We'll just go with them. But absolutely lovely and really powerful, like, incredible book. So now we have other questions. So, so the one that has been upvoted is, so speaking of Drag Race, what do you make of RuPaul's social media silence during this time?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'll be honest, I haven't really been following what she's been saying or not saying, but I will say, I think anyone with a platform, we need to be a part of this moment. I can only speak for myself. I think if I'm given a platform or privilege of any kind, I think if there's anything I've learned as a historian, it's that history judges, and we are literally living through history right now. And so I think, especially with history being recorded better and more comprehensively than ever before, it will be very easy to tell in the future when your grandchildren ask, what did you do in 2020? Were you a part of that? They'll have the receipts. So I think it just goes to show we have to be a part of this moment. And that's why I am vehemently calling upon LGBTQ plus organizations across the country to declare their solidarity, to organize marches, whether they're social distanced or on web. Be a part of this moment.
Yeah, using your voice is something that everyone should be doing more of. So, well, amplifying people of color, but supporting them and using your voice to support them. So, so Jordan, what are your thoughts on Ocean Vuong's "On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous"?
Oh, that's a good question. I have that one too. Look, the book is really difficult. I think that it's a hard read because it's very poetic. I think it's difficult subject matter. I thought it was really beautiful. But, again, same with real life. I think it's really interesting to see a different viewpoint from the Asian experience of how homosexuality is handled. His relationship with his mother is really complicated and complex, and the relationship with his boyfriend in the book is sad and kind of beautiful, and it definitely affected me. I think when I finished it, it wasn't one of those like, I loved it, I hated it kind of things. It was more like, I have to sit with this and probably reread it in a year. So I don't know, it's kind of all over the place kind of review for me. Eric, you read it?
Yeah, I as readers have the prerogative of disagreeing with one another. I disagree with my friend Jordan. I don't think it was a hard read. I think poetry doesn't come naturally. I write in prose, and so my tactic for reading is poetry, but also poetic prose, which I think is how I would describe this book, is to spend your energy less trying to understand like the content matter itself and more appreciating the language, and the construction of the written word. I think is amazing. And I've heard it's a bit harder to listen to. I don't know. Did you listen to it or read it, Jordan?
No, I read it, but you have to keep in mind, I also I read a lot of books a week, so to have to all of a sudden stop in your tracks and actually focus on the words a lot more, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. I highly wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend it more as kind of like take a few bites out of it before bed, and kind of savor the language versus like really reading into every single word, because it is beautifully written. But I think you're right that it is, it takes a further level of kind of interrogation to really get to the meat of it. But it covers a lot of issues, especially of intersectionality and the opioid crisis and and the legacy of warfare that I think really speaks a lot to this moment as well.
And I have an opinion as well that falls kind of in between. So I agree with the incredible, beautiful, poetic language, because I felt like every word was so specifically chosen that I didn't think it was an easy read, but I did I thought about things as I was reading it so much, and thought that every word had so much meaning behind it. So I thought the book was incredible, but it did take me a second to read it. It wasn't, because for as small as it is, you would think I would just plow through it, but I did have to take my time a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So Jordan, do you have a list of Black gay authors that should be on people's reading lists?
I do have a list of LGBTQIA books that are in my profile on my Bookstagram account, and I've been sharing lots of stories this week of Black authors and books on racism and anti-racism. So if you go to my account, I've been highlighting a lot of those all week, and I will continue to do so, as well as amplifying members of the Black book community that have been doing the work for a lot of us, and sharing a lot of those recommendations.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone who's watching who needs the link, on Instagram, Jordan is at Jordys, JORDYS.book.club. I've been trying to persuade him to join Facebook as well, because I think it's there are so many vibrant communities on Facebook too. So we'll work on it after this tour.
Definitely be sure to check out like Syed Jones and other queer authors on their Facebook pages, because they are doing a good job of supporting each other and recommending books. So, so the next question is from Richard in Australia, and he says, I recommend Holding the Man, a powerful, personal, joyous, and emotional memoir by Australian writer, actor, and activist Tim Congreve about his 15-year relationship with the boy he met in a Catholic school in the mid-70s through to the AIDS epidemic. It has also been developed into a beautiful movie. Yeah. And a book that I read recently that both of you, I think, well, if you haven't already read it, The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles. It just came out. It was part of the Hub City, which is kind of an award-winning press. We did an event with Carter on Tuesday. I loved that book. And it's a look at small town America at the height of the AIDS crisis, 1986. So it, from someone who was born and raised in the Midwest, it gives you quite a look at what it was like to be in Middle America. And an incredible book.
What's the name of it one more time?
The Prettiest Star.
Prettiest Star.
Who's the author?
Carter Sickles. So I don't know if we have any other questions, but we should definitely, if you have questions, be sure to ask them. And one thing that from earlier in the conversation that I wanted to recommend for listeners as well. So I like to give talks on how to increase your diversity in your reading. And the best way to do that is to keep track of what you're reading and then looking at the numbers. So being very conscious of what you're choosing to read, what you're going to read next. So when you look at a list and you see, okay, the last 10 books I read, only 2 of them were by an author of color, a queer person, anything like that. And just really being like, oh, I need to really branch out. So the last 8 books I read were history books by white authors. That's not being proactive about your diversity in reading and supporting other voices. So that's something that I highly recommend for readers.
I love that.
I did that last week. I read 80 books and I was at 20% were authors of color.
Wow.
Wait, you read 80 books last week?
I read 80 books so far in 2020,
okay.
And 20% of them have been by authors of color. I'm a fast
80 books of 20 in 2020.
Yeah. Is that a lot?
Anyway, I gotta go. Whatever. Writing one book counts as reading a few. It looks like we have some questions at the bottom. If you scroll down.
Yep. So Tyler asks, living in a more gay white space, myself in that camp as well, what steps can we take to expand our circle both online and in person?
I mean, I think for I mean, for me, obviously, it was joining the book community. It really expanded my outreach and really introduced me to a lot of communities that I don't think I would have normally been introduced to. I mean, I didn't really know what white privilege was or what it meant to be privileged until I joined the book community and was called on it. So for me, that was a huge aspect of it. And I think you really get to see when you're in your own personal bubble who you're following, and if they're all sharing the same stories, maybe it's time for you to start branching out a little bit and who you're interacting with online. But that's just my personal story.
Yeah, and same way, how do you make friends in real life, right? Like if you want a friend or to expand your circle, well, how do I make, if I move to a new town, how do I make new friends? Well, when I moved to LA.
Not very well.
Hey, I've been busy. That's so mean. I have friends.
I'm saying about me.
Oh, neither of us have very many friends.
Relax, you're my friend.
We're both book nerds. No, but I would just say, same way online, right? If you see someone putting out interesting content or who shares similar affinities as you do, add them as a friend. Start sliding into their DMs just as you would like flirt. You can flirt with anyone, whether it's like people of color or women or anyone who is offering something new, because this is also in the middle of a plague when we're all sitting here in our apartments. This is the time when social norms are already being exploded, and now is the time to kind of say, all right, well, maybe the norms of me being in my own little bubble, maybe I can expand myself outside of that a little bit.
So the Sexican Dreamer, Eric, asks, I'm curious what Jordan is working on right now creatively.
That is a very good question. I handle, in my job, I don't talk about that much. I do book acquisition, so it's my job to read books, find the ones that might be right for television adaptation, and then kind of shepherd them through the process and then push them off onto the creative teams at our company who handle it. So it changes every week, and I can't go that much into it. I'm sorry, but it's very creatively fulfilling, and I love it. So
kind of as the dream job. I mean, like reading books all day and then deciding which books you turn into like TV shows. I'm like secretly friends with him because I just want to be him. So
and it came about because of Book Instagram. I literally built a huge network out of being on Book Instagram, and it led to me creating that job. So I'm very grateful for that.
Wow.
I've got a couple for you. So Eric, can you touch on the process of writing Deviant's War, how it affected you, and how the book changed from when you started to when you finished?
Ooh, that's so good. That's a good question. I mean, it was a 7-year process, and I think it was a labor of love. I am a better researcher than I am a storyteller. So I'm very good at finding information that has otherwise been hidden, traveling the country, going to different archives, and amassing as much historical information as I could. The downside of all of that is when you do a little bit too much research, the hardest part about telling a story, of writing any book, of telling any history, is just like a statue. You start with this marble block and you have to whittle it away and figure out what makes it into something ideally beautiful, but at least readable. And so my process, I think, is really starting with trying to start with a blank slate and let the chronology tell its own story, and trying to figure out, okay, let me figure out what happened based off of these archival documents. Then you see, oh, I see a lot of correspondence with this one organization in Los Angeles. I need to go to Los Angeles now and see what they were up to. Or, for example, like I see that Frank Kameny went to the 1963 March on Washington, organized by a gay black man, Bayard Rustin, where Martin Luther King declared, "I have a dream." What's Bayard Rustin's story? How are these stories connected and expanding outward from the archive? I think is so important for any historian to do and say, all right, how do I trace these threads to other movements? And when you do that hard work, that's where you realize that oppression is a shared experience. That, you know, us as gay men, we were borrowing, as I said, from the Black Freedom Movement every single step of the way. I didn't go into telling that story. I didn't go into it with that original intention. That's something that I stumbled upon after saying, how did Frank Kameny get that idea? And so making that conscious decision to trace those threads, I think is probably the most fulfilling part of telling the story too. Then you have to whittle it down, and that's the hardest part.
So Chris asks that given the two on this chat together, are there plans for a script being written for Deviant's War?
I always told, I'll never forget when we first met, Jordan was like, well, what can I do for you? And I was like, I just want a friend.
Friends. I was like, I don't understand.
I was like, I'll be the first to admit, like, my goal.
To be fair, you had been overserved that night also.
What? That's never happened.
I don't know what he's talking about. Well, I mean, my goal has always been to tell this story and getting out to as many people as possible. I went and got a PhD solely to be able to have the funding and the time and the resources to write this book. I never wanted to be a professor. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I wanted to tell this story and get it out there to as many people as possible. So, of course, I'm in Los Angeles. I would love to continue telling this story, but honestly, it's been 7 years, and I think I want other people to read the story and see, oh, I'm really curious about this one minor character in this book who deserves their own book, whether it's Sylvia Rivera, Ernestine Eppinger, all of these heroes who existed before Stonewall and after, but who are still heroes, and they deserve their own stories and their own books. And so, a movie would be great, but I'd be much more fulfilled if there were someone else who in 5 years says, you know what, Erica Cervini inspired me to write this book. That's what I'm aiming for.
So,
and I think from a TV perspective, personally for me, it's my goal to always try and tell stories of people that aren't traditionally represented on TV. So I would like nothing more than to see Eric's book and the history and those people portrayed on TV in an authentic way, especially since so many people don't know those stories.
Yeah. Maybe time for one more, and then.
All right. So I have my favorite then. What advice would you give? What would you say to a younger you about what lies ahead, and how does that impact the way you interact with children today?
That's very RuPaul. Jordan, I'll let you start.
Look, I've gone through a lot of hardships and challenges in my life. Obviously in context of what I've done, and I think that I would tell myself, it's going to suck for a while and then it'll be really good. I met my husband as a result of, at the end of a long journey of going through a lot of these things. And I think ultimately, if I had to do it again, I would do all the same things again, because it led me to, my friends in the gay community, my confidence in being a gay man, and being married to my best friend. So I think that,
His name's also Jordan, and they're both adorable.
My husband just goes, "Aw."
They're incredible, and they have the most adorable little dog. Not little; it's a very large dog named Leo. I would say mine's a less adorable answer, but I would say, on kind of going back to that question about the creative process, I would say to anyone watching who's been putting off a project or is nervous about introducing it into the world, now is the time, right? Now is the time when social norms, people are being vulnerable, things are different, everything's new and scary for everyone. Now is the time to take the risk and introduce what has been in your mind to the world. It's the time to be vulnerable. It's the time to be creative and share. And so please, right now we need storytellers. So please, after reading your history, then tell your own history, tell your own stories, tell your own poetry, because my God, the world needs it.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you to both of you from Love Think Books for doing this, for writing the book, for doing your Bookstagram. Thank you so much. You're both wonderful. And you can buy the book. You can hit the button. You can buy the book from Love Think Books. We can ship anywhere in the country, and we are happy to be a queer bookstore. So.
Amazing. Thank y'all so much for Jordan, for being in conversation and being vulnerable and sharing your knowledge and your learning this past week. And Shane, thank you for providing the space for us to have this conversation. And it just goes to show how crucial you and independent bookstores like Left Bank are. So thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Yes. Black Lives Matter. Black trans lives matter. Thank you, everyone who's fighting. Let's do this. Let's make it to the weekend at the very least.